antidepressant drug ever.
If I were depressed, it would be the first drug that I would go to. And I think any doctor that you asked in the country would answer the same thing.
But the Church of Scientology wants the FDA to ban it.
The drug is producing in these people an obsessive, violent need to kill and to be killed.
Are you claiming that the FDA
Is a political entity controlled by the drug companies? Absolutely, I'm claiming that, and I'm stating that.
Before she even ran for office, Governor Ann Richards knew how dirty Texas politics could be and what it might cost her.
And I was very fearful of running for office. I thought, I don't want to do this. If I do this, it's going to be the end of my marriage. It's going to be the end of my life as I know it. And I thought, well, might not be a bad idea.
Have you ever done anything in a campaign you wish you hadn't?
Yeah.
What was that?
Well, I wouldn't tell you for the world.
Come on.
The REA brought electricity and eventually telephones to rural America. But now the lights are on, the phones are in, and those low-cost government loans are going to a lot of communities that aren't exactly rural and to a lot of big corporations that don't need the subsidies. To Harold Hunter, it seems like welfare for the wealthy.
There's no doubt in your mind that this is a boondoggle.
In the way it's been treated, absolutely.
And people in Washington know it.
I don't see how they can miss it.
I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm Orly Safer.
I'm Ed Bradley.
I'm Steve Croft.
I'm Lesley Stahl. Those stories and Andy Rooney tonight on 60 Minutes.
And now the man I retained 1 year ago to recommend this corporation's property, casualty, and group health insurance companies. Here with his findings, the most sought-after efficiency expert in business, Mr. Fred Fox.
Wausau.
Thank you, Mr. Fox.
For all your business insurance, one word says it all.
I think the customers definitely sense the difference, not only in the company, but in us.
There is a definite pride in what we do and how we do it.
I mean, the employees own the company. You are Avis. I'm Avis. If you've seen our roving rapid return now, you'll see that you don't even have to step out of the car before you're already checked in.
If you don't like the color of the car, if I have a different color car, I'll fix it.
We call over 1,500 customers a month just to see if they're satisfied.
There's a big sense of pride in owning a company.
So why rent from anyone but an owner?
If this is a cold, this is the flu. Mediflu, maximum strength relief in a convenient caplet. For more than a cold, for the flu. Mediflu. If this is a cold, this is the flu. Mediflu, without drowsiness. Maximum strength relief for more than a cold, for the flu. Mediflu.
If you suffer from depression, chances are someone has recommended that you take Prozac, an antidepressant that the medical establishment says is safe and effective. But the Church of Scientology says it isn't. Prozac, they say, causes a violent need to kill and be killed, and Scientologists are on a crusade to have it banned. Okay, what about Prozac?
I don't understand it. It just, sometimes I think I'm going to become a bag lady. I get scared.
For 10 years, Maria Romero has been suffering from depression, a serious illness. Sometimes she spends weeks on an unmade bed in a filthy apartment. She told us she didn't care about anything, and she often thought of suicide.
I've sometimes been afraid to take the subway home, because I might throw myself in.
Most doctors believe chronic depression, like Romero's, is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. To correct it, her doctor prescribed Prozac.
What have you heard about it?
Basically, I've heard that people on Prozac commit suicide or become violent.
Romero was concerned about taking the drug because she'd seen a lot of stories claiming Prozac can be deadly.
After being on Prozac for 21 days, my wife shot and killed both of my sons and tried to kill herself.
For the past year, former Prozac users have been going on the talk show circuit to warn people that Prozac is a killer drug.
I went from somebody who was never depressed to a person who became violent toward my doctor, attacked him 3 times physically, attempted suicide 6 times, and slashed my body over 150 times. And
those stories scare Prozac users. They infuriate psychiatrists. Dr. Paul Riley is the medical director at the St. Vincent Stress Center in Indianapolis.
If I were depressed, it would be the first drug that I would go to.
Yourself?
Myself.
Without any fear?
Without any fear, and I think any doctor that you asked in the country would answer the same thing.
We talked to a lot of psychiatrists, and every one of them said that Prozac, when carefully monitored by a physician, is a safe drug. They all complain that a smear campaign against Prozac is being orchestrated by a religious cult, and that some of their patients are afraid to take the drug, and others already on Prozac are taking themselves off.
I cannot use this medication when I should be using this medication because a group of eccentric people say it's bad and because they can influence all of television.
The driving force behind the negative publicity, the Church of Scientology, which has been waging war, those are its own words, against psychiatry and psychiatric drugs for more than 20 years. The Scientologists are fighting Prozac through a group they set up, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights.
The drug is producing in these people an obsessive, violent need to kill and to be killed.
The president of the Citizens Commission, Dennis Clark, takes credit for starting the controversy over Prozac. He's appeared on dozens of radio and television shows blasting the drug.
Our small organization has now documented over 130 violent deaths associated with the use of Prozac.
Dennis Clark is neither a scientist nor a doctor. He calls himself an investigative reporter. No psychiatrist, no medical organization that we know of has agreed with him and the other Scientologists about Prozac. And when Clark's group filed a petition with the Food and Drug Administration to have Prozac banned, the FDA said there is no solid evidence that the drug causes violent behavior. Clark's response? He attacked the FDA at a news conference. Are you claiming that the FDA
is a political entity controlled by the drug companies? Absolutely, I'm claiming that and I'm stating that.
To try to prove that Prozac is a killer drug, the Scientologists almost always point to the massacre that took place at the Standard Reviewer printing plant in Louisville, Kentucky. 2 years ago, while on Prozac, a former employee of the plant named Joseph Westbecker showed up with an AK-47 and opened fire. He killed 8 co-workers, wounded 12, then shot himself in the head. The Scientologists claim Westbecker was a non-violent man that Prozac turned psychotic. But Dr. Richard Greathouse, the coroner who investigated Westbecker's death, says he was mentally ill years before he ever took Prozac.
He had violent thoughts toward the Standard Reviewer Company and blamed them for many of his problems. And he wanted to...
Before he went on Prozac?
Long before he went on Prozac, he wanted to destroy the place.
In 1984, 5 years before he took Prozac, Westbecker's medical records show that he had this conversation with a doctor. Have you ever felt like harming someone else? Yes, Westbecker said. Who? My foreman. When? At work. The same medical records show Westbecker had already attempted suicide 12 to 15 times. The Scientologists dismiss his history of mental illness. They just keep insisting it was Prozac that made him pull the trigger. Well, what about the other 100+ people they claim Prozac made suicidal? We decided to look into some of those cases. And what we found were people who, like Westbecker, had already shown signs of mental instability or suicidal behavior well before they ever went on Prozac. Bonnie Leitch appears regularly with the Scientologists to denounce Prozac. She claims she had absolutely no history of mental illness until her doctor put her on Prozac as a pick-me-upper, a drug she says drove her to attempt suicide.
In an instant, I thought, I know a good idea. I'll just kill myself. This seems like a real good idea. So I thought, well, what am I going to use? So I found my mother's arthritis medicine, and I took a whole handful and took her medicine. And I went into the sitting room to sit down to wait to die.
Had you ever been depressed?
No, I have never. I'm not a depressed person.
But this medical report from the hospital where she was admitted after her suicide attempt says apparently this lady has been seriously depressed for some time. Had you ever tried to commit suicide before?
No, I have not. I have not.
I ask you because also in this medical report from the hospital, it says, and I'm quoting from the medical record, I'm not making this up. She has a history of suicide attempt approximately 20 years ago where she took an attempted overdose of over-the-counter medications.
That was not a suicidal attempt. I was a 19-year-old girl trying to save her marriage, and it certainly wasn't a suicidal attempt.
What was it? Tell us about it.
It was a 19-year-old trying to scare the tire out of her husband. And that was it.
Leitch is national director of the Prozac Survivors Support Group, which was organized by the Citizens Commission. These women all claim Prozac made them suicidal. Donna Alcorn says she wanted to kill herself and others.
I was homicidal. Everybody wanted to avoid me. My friends thought I had totally became insane and had lost it.
Alcorn attempted suicide 3 times, twice while she was taking Prozac, and once a month after she stopped. Do you blame Prozac?
Yes.
You showed me a letter from your doctor that you showed me.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, and he really says that your problems were not related to the drug, that you were a nervous wreck well before you ever began Prozac. You were sometimes hyped up well before Prozac. You self-medicated regularly with Valium and also with Prozac, and you adjusted your own doses. You gave me this letter.
I know. Yes, I did.
The letter goes on to say, you told me that you thought about suicide well before you were ever given Prozac. He says in this letter that he doesn't think it was the Prozac per se that caused you to try to commit suicide. Right. Why are you so convinced it's the Prozac when your own doctor says it wasn't? Why couldn't it have been that the Prozac didn't work? You know what I mean? You were depressed.
I was depressed, but I wasn't suicidal.
Well, he says you were. Suicidal thinking is one of the symptoms of depression. In fact, doctors say that 1 out of 6 people with depression actually commit suicide, and that has nothing to do with Prozac. Have you ever seen any patient of yours on Prozac exhibiting a tendency toward suicide or violence that you feel the drug was inducing?
No.
You don't think it's the drug?
I think it's the depression. I don't think in any way that it is the medication.
But Dennis Clark pulls out his stack full of complaints from people on Prozac and persists in claiming that with all this smoke, there has to be some fire. Hannah Whitfield, who was a Scientologist for 16 years, says the Citizens Commission is creating that smoke as part of its long-standing war against psychiatry and psychiatric drugs. Whitfield, who now takes Prozac, used to be an assistant to L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology's founder. What do the Scientologists believe about psychiatry?
That it is the foremost ill of this world, that it is the foremost group that is bringing about the famine, the economic disasters, the political disasters in this world.
Psychiatry?
Yes.
The heart of all evil?
Yes.
Instead of going to psychiatrists, Scientologists get counseling sessions with a device called an e-meter, which is supposed to monitor negative thoughts. The money Scientology gets from e-meter sales, the devices cost thousands of dollars, and from the counseling sessions, is a major source of income for the church. But psychiatrists call the e-meter quackery, and that helps make psychiatry public enemy number 1 for the Citizens Commission. Well, what is the Citizens Commission on Human Rights' main mission?
It is to remove psychiatry completely from the world and to put Scientology in its place as the foremost mental health therapy.
Clark blames psychiatrists and the companies that make psychiatric drugs for turning the country into a nation of drug addicts.
The medical, psychiatric, pharmaceutical industry has built into this country a hardcore of drug addicts like we have never seen in history with all the new drugs. This is drug-induced terrorism built into our country by the medical, psychiatric, pharmaceutical industry.
As part of their case against Prozac, Scientologists cite a report by Harvard psychiatrist Martin Teicher. He claims that 6 of his patients on Prozac became obsessed with thoughts of suicide. But none of them committed suicide, and in fact, Teicher says he is pro-Prozac, and the Scientologists are distorting his report.
So when they talk about Prozac, they don't tell you that with careful monitoring, you can use the drug safely and effectively.
Do you still prescribe Prozac?
Yes, I do.
Careful monitoring seems to be the key to safe use of Prozac, because let's face it, it is a powerful drug that can produce side effects such as nervousness or insomnia. But we found no scientific evidence that Prozac makes people violent. What we did find is that it did an awful lot of good for Maria Romero. You'll remember she was so depressed, she was afraid she might kill herself. After we saw her, she started taking Prozac, and 2.5 weeks later, we paid her another visit.
I can't get over it.
And
you're smiling.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Great. I feel great. I feel like I'm a different person. Somebody else. Something left my body and another person came in.
She no longer spends her days in a filthy apartment.
So 2 weeks after you started on this drug, whammo.
Right.
You stopped being depressed.
I stopped being
got
depressed.
out of bed, fixed your apartment, fixed yourself,
Fixed
and
my
are
life.
losing weight.
Yeah. I'm happy about it. I think it's great.
The president of the Church of Scientology, Reverend Heber Jensch, called us before our story ran to complain that Hannah Whitfield, the former Scientologist, was a kidnapper. She denies it. He repeated the charge about the FDA, claiming that half the members of the FDA advisory board had a financial interest in the companies that manufacture drugs they're supposed to be investigating.
Three years ago, we set out to create a sports event.